Hello, I finished my first book of November. I actually finished this one a couple days ago and I totally forgot to film this. I don't know why, I just keep forgetting to do these. So I finished The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead finally. This is one that everybody has talked about so much. It was the 2016 National Book Award winner? I can't remember, but it was it's a big deal. Obviously, it's talking about the plight of people running from slavery, and it's terrible, and it's a terrible piece of our history. The biggest thing in this novel is that the Underground Railroad is an actual railroad, and I think that might be confusing for some people. I did see at least one review of people, and it might be people who don't live in the country, so they aren't as tied to this subject, but one man said oh, I didn't realize the Underground Railroad was an actual railroad. And so I do think that that might be a little bit confusing for people, or that it might just make people think that things were different than it was. Once I read large sections at a time, that was when I was able to actually get into it. But otherwise, I wasn't that excited about this book. It ended where I felt oh, okay, I didn't hate the ending, but I also kind of felt meh about the ending. And I feel stupid even saying that, because I feel everybody loves this book. So that is my first review of November, and I'm very thankful to have finished it. And I wouldn't say not to read it. I would actually be interested in more people's perspectives of why they loved this so much. So that's it for today. Today is Veterans Day. It's actually not Veterans Day. I have the day off in observance of Veterans Day, which is tomorrow. It's the 99th anniversary, I think, right, of the end of World War I, which is kind of crazy to think it was that long ago. Not that I was alive then, but it's just kind of crazy to hear 99 years. So I finished reading Growing an Inch by Stanley Gordon West. He's a local-ish author. He grew up in, I think, St. Paul, and he's actually not alive anymore. I think he died in 2015, but he's written a few books, but there's this little series, and I'm not even sure what they're called specifically. The first one is Until They Bring the Streetcars Back. Second one is Finding Laura Bugs, and this is the third one. I read these probably when I was 20. I read the whole series and I freaking loved them. They actually teach them in our local school district. Not this one, but they teach the other two depending on the classes that people take. And I love them so much. I'm going to do a standalone review for the three of them, but this is a story about Donnie Cunningham. They all have interrelated characters, but you don't have to read the series in any sort of order, and I'll talk about that in my video. But this is a kid who has lost his mother. We don't exactly know how, but we do find out, obviously, and he's just kind of trying to keep his family together as his dad is kind of spiraling. He has issues with alcohol. This is also set in 1949. I didn't specify that. So yeah, it's 1949, 1950. And it's such a nice series. This one is sad. There is discussion of, there's 3 different scenarios where we talk about animals and maybe animal cruelty a little bit. And so if you are averse to that, which I don't like reading, but it makes this book even more sad, you may want to avoid that. I hate reading stuff with animal cruelty or animals dying beyond just that they died of natural causes. So that's something to think about, but I do think the story is really good and sweet. I really love these books, and I was happy to reread this one because I hadn't read this in 12 years or something. So that's all. Talk to you with the next book. Hello, I finished another book this month. This one took me a little while, and I'm not really sure why. It's super popular. I finished Mouse. I have the complete Mouse, so it is parts 1 and 2. And I actually really liked that it wasn't just a retelling of his father's story from living through the Holocaust, but it was also has these little, it's a graphic novel. I didn't specify that. I feel like most people know what this is. But I like that there's a lot of conversations about him, Art, and his father, and they're kind of like bickering and stuff like that. I really liked that, and I felt like it added a lot to the story. I mean, this is what it is. It's a story of how his father lived through the Holocaust, and how a lot of people didn't. It was good. I liked it, and I would tell people to read it, and I think this might be a good kind of intro for a younger person who enjoys historical novels as well. And yeah, that's all I have to say about this one. The one thing I will say is they talked about when they were being like rescued and they were taken from Auschwitz, but it was the Germans that were pulling them back into Germany to try to like cover what they had done, and they were just going to kill them in another way, not at Auschwitz. And they take them on trains, like cattle car trains, and they talked about how they would just stop, and it would be like every day people would die in the trains, and they would open, like the Germans would open the trains and have them push the dead bodies out and stuff like that. This is obviously a tactic to get rid of more Jewish people, but I had never heard that piece of it, or if I've heard it, I forgot it. So I thought that was really disgusting, because you've lived through this war, and you're just kind of like biding your time until someone rescues you, and people are continuing to die. Talks about how his dad lived through that, like the specific details of how he lived through it. And they talked about how some cattle cars were just never opened, so that's how they died. And I didn't remember that part, so that kind of like hit me. I'd read that part today, and I felt like it's, you know, the Holocaust is one of those things that's just, you know, it's like we all know about it, so we become desensitized to it. And then when you start reading accounts of it or different things, watching movies and stuff, it's kind of overwhelming. Bad it was, and how catastrophic it was to groups of people. And, you know, there's just nothing, I guess, that I can say that's new or profound, but I really liked this one, and I liked this copy. I was glad that my library had the complete version of it. It was just nice. It feels nice. It's very heavy, like a good graphic novel. I'm talking too long. So that's it for this one. So the book I'm going to talk about today is Dear Fahrenheit 451 by Annie Spence. She is a librarian. I would say the first 2/3-ish of the book is just letters to different books. Some of them are books she loves. Some of them are books that she hates. Random books that she's having to weed through for the library. All different types of things. And I just loved this. My favorites that she wrote to are The Crucible. That one was pretty funny. She talks about reading it, having to read it in high school. Time Traveler's Wife, that made me put it back on my to-be read list. I read that one years and years ago, and I loved it so much, so I'm going to put that back on my list. I loved the one about Matilda. That one kind of like pulls at the heartstrings a little bit. It's really nice. And then I thought the funniest one was it was a letter to the library in Beauty and the Beast, because I think like all of us that love reading a lot have seen Beauty and the Beast and that library and have been like, if only I could have a library that has ladders. So I feel like it's for like, this book is for that kind of person. This is such a cute book. I loved it so much. And sometimes it's hard to explain to people why you love reading and why you love to like dive into these books and make these lists and collect, you know, your piles of books. And I feel like this book helped me feel like I'm not the only one, that I'm not some sort of weirdo. So that's all I have to say. If you've read this, tell me what you think. If you're going to read it, tell me what you think. And I think that's all I have to say. It is November 26th, a few days after Thanksgiving, and I have not read very much in the last week, but I did get one thing done. I got the new Dan Brown Origin from my public library, and I made it my goal for my long weekend to get through this guy. It was like 460 pages, so I really made an effort to finish it. I really liked it. I know a lot of people feel really, like, I hear a lot of people kind of like poo-poo Dan Brown and his writing, and people are like, well, if you want a book that's written well, don't read this. But I think these are great books. Obviously, the general plot line is very similar. You know, something happens and Robert Langdon ends up having to go through this action-packed mystery with a beautiful woman and trying to find these things. But I just find these books so interesting because all of the like historical pieces are there. I was Googling like Francisco Franco, and I was Googling like the different buildings and stuff like that they talk about, and I just find these really interesting. So I think if you blow these books off because you think they're silly, it's kind of like non-literature, whatever, I would actually recommend reading these sometimes if you want something that's fast paced. Obviously it's like big, so you're not going to crank through it necessarily effortlessly, but I really like these, and I think it's silly. I actually heard a lifestyle blogger was talking about all of her favorite books and stuff like that, and she posts all of these very like kind of highbrow literature or very like feminist literature, which is cool. But someone made a comment to her on an Instagram live, I think, that I was watching, and they said, do you ever read Dan Brown? And she was like, ugh, no. And I kind of like, it kind of took me back, and she said, I know that that sounds kind of snotty, but like, it's just not for me. And she just kind of poo-pooed it, and I know it's not cool, like feminist literature and whatever, it doesn't make you necessarily look cool when you're reading these, but you still get to learn a lot from these. And I just think that if you are shut off from a certain genre or author or anything like that because you think it's not for you, I think you're probably just editing great stories and great things that you can learn. So that's my 2 cents for Dan Brown and why you shouldn't say something's not for you without trying it first. So I'm just going to put my what I read in November together, and I realized that I forgot to film a clip for 2 books. I finished 2 books yesterday. So the first book that I finished was in the morning, and it was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I've been listening to these all year. I started in January with the first one. They're so long and they're great, and I just listen to them before I go to bed. They help me fall asleep. Harry Potter is a comfort read for me. I love the Jim Dale version, and I finished it last night. And it's kind of a bummer because now I'm like, what am I gonna read? I got a version of A Christmas Carol that is also read by Jim Dale because I just love his voice, and I was looking at what to read and that was suggested to me, so I'm gonna listen to that next, at least in December. I think the story is only maybe 5 hours long or something, which like I'm used to listening to Harry Potter where they're like 20 hours long. So who knows what I'll listen to. If you have suggestions for like easy comforting reads, so like I tend to lean towards things like A Series of Unfortunate Events or things like that, where it's like I'm not sitting at the edge of my seat and they're kind of like funny and lighthearted, or like Harry Potter, even when they're serious, it's not like, you know, someone's being like graphically like murdered or anything like that, and I already know the plot lines. So if you have any of those, that would be a great suggestion. I also finished the book Moxie by Jennifer Mathau is how I say it. I'm not sure how to say it. And I totally forgot. I already sent the book back. I already gave the book back to the library, so I'll insert a little clip of me so you can see the cover of the book. I find that very helpful. It's such a great book. Very easy read, young adult, about a girl named Vivian who's kind of trying to fight the patriarchy in her small town, and I found it to be a really easy read, but it also kind of felt a little inspiring, and I thought it was presented in a really good way for a younger reader to maybe feel that they could advocate for themselves. So those are my books. I finished reading everything yesterday, which is convenient. Today is November 30th. And I just started a new book today, and I'll start A Christmas Carol tonight. So those are all the books that I finished reading. This was a good book month this month. I got a lot of really good stuff. So if you read anything that was really good this month or lately, and you feel like I should read it, please give me that suggestion / comforting nighttime book reads. So anyway, thank you for watching if you did, and I will talk to you later. Bye.